was a warm, humid night in July when the storm hit. The forecast had warned of it, but I hadn't expected it to arrive with such fury. One minute, the sky was calm and clear, the stars twinkling above. The next, dark clouds rolled in, and the air seemed to vibrate with the promise of thunder. I was alone in my family's cabin, deep in the woods of northern Georgia. My parents owned the place as a weekend getaway, but I often used it during the summer for some solitude while working on my photography projects. This weekend, I'd gone up to get some shots of the night sky, but with the storm bearing down, that plan was completely scrapped. By the time the rain started, it was already past midnight, and the wind was so strong I could hear the trees groaning outside. I sat on the couch with a cup of coffee, watching the storm unfold through the wide windows. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the entire forest, followed almost immediately by a deep, booming clap of thunder. I've always liked storms. There's something peaceful about being inside while nature rages outside. But this storm was different. It felt angry. I closed the windows against the rain, deciding to head to bed early. Just as I locked the front door, the power went out. Darkness swallowed the cabin in an instant. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning. I fumbled for my phone and used the flashlight to navigate my way to the kitchen, where I kept a few candles for situations like this. I lit one and placed it on the dining table, its flickering glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. The wind howled louder outside, almost as if it was screaming. I couldn't help but feel uneasy, but I brushed it off as the usual nerves that come with being alone in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed my phone to check the weather app for updates, hoping the storm would pass quickly. But with no cell reception and the power still out, I had no way of knowing when it would end. I took the candle to my bedroom and tried to relax, flipping through a book I'd brought along. The sound of the rain beating against the roof and windows was constant, but every now and then, I would hear something different. A thud, almost like something hitting the side of the cabin. At first, I thought it was just the wind blowing debris around, but then the noise came again. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Thud, thud, thud. I froze, straining my ears to listen. My mind raced with explanations. Maybe it was a tree branch being blown against the cabin, or an animal taking shelter on the porch. But something about it felt off. It was too steady, too deliberate. I stood up, my heart beginning to pound in my chest, and grabbed my flashlight. I left the candle on my nightstand and slowly made my way to the front of the cabin, toward the source of the sound. The wind was howling louder than ever, and the rain pelted the windows in torrents, but the rhythmic thudding continued. I reached the living room and cautiously approached the front door. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the door and slowly pulled it open, the flashlight beam cutting through the rain and darkness outside. The porch was empty. I shone the light around, looking for anything that could have made the noise. A fallen branch, a loose shutter. But there was nothing. Just as I was about to close the door, lightning lit up the night sky, and in that brief moment, I saw something. Or rather, someone. A figure standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the porch light's reach. They were still, watching. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart now hammering in my chest. Who would be out here, in the middle of a storm, in the dead of night? There wasn't another cabin for miles, and I knew no one had been expected. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was just a lost hiker, seeking shelter from the storm. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. What hiker would be out this far, at this hour, in weather like this? The thudding came again. This time, it was closer. It sounded like it was coming from the side of the house, near the kitchen window. I swallowed hard and made my way toward the sound, every step filled with dread. I peeked out the small window above the sink, but all I could see was the rain cascading down the glass. Another flash of lightning lit up the yard, and that's when I saw it again, the same figure, standing even closer to the cabin now. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair in my haste. Whoever they weren't lost. They were approaching, slowly, methodically. Panic surged through me as I grabbed my phone, desperately trying to get a signal. Nothing. No bars, no connection. I was completely cut off. The next sound wasn't a thud. It was a knock. A single, slow knock on the front door. I froze, staring at the door, waiting for it to happen again. Another knock. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I tried to figure out what to do. Whoever was out there knew I was inside. There was no way to pretend I wasn't home. The knock came again, louder this time. "Hello?" A voice called from outside. It was low, calm, almost friendly. "Is anyone in there? I'm just looking for some help." I didn't respond. My instincts told me not to. Something about the voice felt wrong, like there was a threat hidden beneath the calm exterior. I backed away from the door and grabbed a heavy flashlight from the shelf, holding it like a weapon. The voice came again, this time more insistent. "I just need to come in and get out of the storm for a bit." I moved further back into the cabin, toward the bedroom. My hands were shaking as I shut the door and locked it behind me. I could still hear the knocks, but they were becoming more forceful, more aggressive. And then, they stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the storm. I held my breath, waiting, listening. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Just when I thought it was over, I heard something new, a scratching sound, coming from the bedroom window. I turned slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand, and saw the figure again, pressed up against the glass, their face partially obscured by the rain. They were smiling. I screamed and stumbled backward, knocking over the nightstand. In my panic, I grabbed my phone and tried to call 911, but the signal was still dead. I was trapped. Suddenly, the front door rattled violently, as if someone was trying to break it down. I heard the splintering of wood as the door gave way. They were inside. I ran to the closet and hid behind the hanging clothes, trying to muffle my breathing. I could hear footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, echoing through the small cabin. The door to the bedroom creaked open, and the footsteps stopped right outside the closet. The silence was suffocating. I pressed myself further into the corner, praying they wouldn't find me. And then, just as quickly as it began, the footsteps retreated. The front door slammed shut, and I was left in the oppressive silence of the storm. I waited for what felt like hours before finally emerging from the closet. The cabin was empty. Whoever had been there was gone, but they had left something behind. On the kitchen table, scrawled in wet, muddy letters, were the words, "Next time, I won't knock." I've always found thunderstorms to be somewhat calming. The rhythmic sound of the rain tapping against the windows, the deep rumble of thunder in the distance, it all felt cozy, especially from the safety of my bed. But after that night, I'll never think of thunderstorms the same way again. It was late, probably around 1 a.m., and the storm had been going strong for hours. My parents were out of town for the weekend, leaving me home alone, something I usually enjoyed. With the power flickering on and off due to the storm, I decided to call it a night early. I was reading a book in bed when the rain suddenly intensified, rattling the windows so violently I thought they might shatter. A loud clap of thunder followed, shaking the entire house. I put my book down, a little on edge now, and listened to the wind howling outside. It was fierce, stronger than I'd ever heard it before. It almost sounded like someone was pounding on the walls. I shook off the thought, telling myself it was just the storm playing tricks on me. I was just about to turn off my bedside lamp when I heard a noise, a loud thunk coming from downstairs. My stomach dropped. It wasn't like the other sounds from the storm. This was deliberate, like something heavy had fallen or been knocked over. I tried to calm myself, rationalizing that it could have been the wind knocking something over outside. But then I heard it again. This time it was louder, and it definitely came from inside the house. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The power flickered again, and for a brief second, everything went pitch black. When the lights came back on, I grabbed my phone and slowly got out of bed. My first instinct was to call someone, but I didn't want to freak anyone out if it was nothing. Instead, I opened my bedroom door, cautiously stepping into the hallway. The house was eerily silent, except for the occasional creak of the wind. I tiptoed down the stairs, trying to avoid making any noise. When I reached the bottom, I saw it. The back door was slightly open, swinging back and forth with the wind. My stomach tightened as I realized I hadn't unlocked that door all day. I approached the door slowly, pushing it closed and locking it. But the uneasiness didn't leave me. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and started scanning the room, shining it into the corners and shadows. Nothing seemed out of place. But just as I was about to head back upstairs, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The distinct sound of footsteps coming from the second floor. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no doubt about it now. Someone was inside the house. I quickly backed up toward the front door, ready to run out into the storm if I had to. But then I thought of my phone, which I had left upstairs. I needed to call the police. Forcing myself to calm down, I crept back toward the stairs, making my way up as quietly as I could. Each step felt like an eternity, and the sound of my own heartbeat was deafening. When I reached the top, I could hear the footsteps again, this time coming from my parents' room. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint shadow moving inside. I wanted to turn around and run, but I knew I had to get my phone. I tiptoed toward my room, which was just a few feet away from my parents' door. As I reached the doorway, I felt a gust of cold air hit me. My window was wide open, rain pouring in. My phone was on the bed, soaked from the storm. I snatched it up and bolted for the hallway, but just as I did, I heard the door to my parents' room creak open. I turned and saw a figure standing in the doorway, a man, soaking wet, with his face obscured by the darkness. He just stood there, watching me, not moving, as if waiting for me to make the first move. I didn't wait to find out what he wanted. I sprinted down the stairs, nearly tripping in my panic, and ran straight out the front door into the storm. The rain was so heavy I could barely see in front of me, but I kept running, my heart racing, my mind screaming. I didn't stop until I reached my neighbor's house. I banged on the door until they answered, breathless and drenched. They let me in, and I immediately called the police. When they arrived, they searched the house but found no one. The back door was wide open again, and the window in my room had been smashed, as if someone had forced their way in. But the man I had seen was gone. The police never found out who he was or how long he had been in the house. All I know is that the storm gave him the perfect cover to break in. Now, every time it rains, I can't help but feel that same sense of dread, wondering if someone is out there, waiting for the next thunderstorm to strike again. I never thought a simple thunderstorm could change my life forever, but it did. I've always loved storms. Something about the way the rain lashes against the windows, the lightning slicing through the night sky, and the deep rumble of thunder feels oddly soothing. My house is on the outskirts of a small coastal town, surrounded by woods, making it an ideal spot for storm watching. But after what happened that night, the sound of thunder sends chills down my spine. It was late September, and the weather forecast predicted the worst storm of the season. The rain had started falling around 8 p.m., gentle at first, but by midnight, the wind was howling like a beast unleashed. I had just settled in on my couch with a blanket and a cup of tea, ready to watch the storm from the comfort of my living room. My cat, Luna, curled up on my lap, occasionally glancing out the window as the rain hammered down. The first flash of lightning illuminated the entire room, and for a second, I thought I saw something move outside. Just the trees swaying in the wind, I told myself. But then, another flash, and there it was again. A shadow, darker than the night itself, standing at the edge of the woods. My heart skipped a beat, but I shook it off. It had to be my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, who would be out there in this storm? I decided to close the curtains. Out of sight, out of mind, right? But the feeling that I was being watched lingered. I told myself it was just the storm. Storms had a way of making everything seem more eerie than it really was. Around 2 a.m., the power went out. Typical, I thought, grabbing my phone for light. I wasn't worried. My phone was fully charged, and I had a flashlight somewhere in the kitchen drawer. As I rummaged through the drawer, I heard a noise outside. A thump, like something had hit the side of the house. Luna's ears perked up, and she darted under the couch. Probably just a branch, I muttered to myself, though my hands were shaking. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it out the window. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it impossible to see anything clearly. But then, another flash of lightning, and I saw him. Standing at the edge of my yard, just beyond the reach of the porch light, was a man. He was tall, dressed in what looked like an old raincoat, the hood pulled over his head. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at the house. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Who the hell was he? And why was he just standing there in the middle of a storm? My mind raced through a dozen explanations, none of them comforting. Maybe he was lost, or maybe his car had broken down. But why wouldn't he knock on the door if he needed help? I waited, watching him through the rain-splattered window, but he didn't move. He just stood there, staring. I didn't want to go outside, but I also didn't want to stay inside knowing he was out there. Grabbing my phone, I tried calling the police, but the storm had knocked out the signal. Of course it had. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising panic. Maybe if I just ignored him, he would go away. I locked all the doors and windows, checked them twice, and retreated to my bedroom, where I barricaded myself with a dresser against the door. Luna was nowhere to be found, probably hiding somewhere safe. Lucky her. I lay in bed, clutching my phone, waiting for the sun to come up. The sound of the rain against the roof was deafening, and every creak of the house made my heart race. I kept telling myself that he was gone, that it was just a weird encounter, and that I'd laugh about it later. But then I heard it, a slow, deliberate tapping on the window. I held my breath, praying that I was imagining things, that the storm was playing tricks on my ears. But the tapping continued, steady, insistent. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it at the window, but the blinds were down and I couldn't see out. The tapping stopped, only to be replaced by a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across the glass. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was out there. Slowly, I got out of bed and approached the window. My hands were trembling as I reached for the blinds. I pulled them back in one quick motion, and my heart stopped. There he was, inches from the window, his face pressed against the glass. His eyes were wide, wild, and bloodshot, his lips stretched into a grotesque smile. His breath fogged up the window as he stared at me, unblinking. I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. The room plunged into darkness, but I didn't need light to know he was still there. I could feel his eyes on me, could hear the faint scratching as he dragged his fingers across the window pane. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get out of the house, but my body was frozen in place. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed with fear as he watched me through the glass. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the scratching stopped. The room was silent except for the pounding of the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. I waited, listening, but there was nothing. I dared to take a step forward, to peek out the window once more. He was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my room, clutching my phone and flashlight, waiting for the sun to rise. When morning finally came, I checked every window and door, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no scratches on the window, nothing to prove that he had ever been there. But I know what I saw, and I know that he'll be back. Because sometimes, during the quiet moments before a storm, I hear the faintest sound of scratching on the glass, like nails dragging across the window pane, and I know he's watching.